When Manchester manager Alex Campbell vanished in 1998, everyone assumed he'd cracked under pressure or run away. But 5 years later, during stadium renovations, workers found his secret journal buried in a time capsule. It wasn't a diary. It was a blueprint exposing a deep-rooted corruption, a betting syndicate preying on his youth team. The final pages contained a coded list of players and a desperate warning. Now, Detective Sarah Reid has decoded his message, and it points to a chilling truth. Alex Campbell didn't run. He was silenced for what he knew, and his body is still hidden somewhere inside the club he loved. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. In the heart of Manchester, where football isn't just a sport but a religion, there's a ghost. His name is Alex Campbell, and in 1998, he simply vanished. But let's go back, before the mystery, when he was just the professor. Picture the scene, the hallowed training grounds of Manchester. The air smells of cut grass and damp earth. Alex Campbell, a man in his 50s with the weathered face of a lifelong football man, paces the sideline. He's not watching the first-team stars. His eyes are fixed on the youth squad, a bunch of scrawny, hyper-talented kids giving their all under the floodlights. He clutches a small, black leather notebook like it's a sacred text. Because to him, it is. But upstairs, in the plush, wood-paneled boardroom, a different game is being played. The chairman, a man in an impossibly expensive suit, leans across the polished table. His voice is smooth, but his eyes are cold. The fans want trophies, Alex. The board wants revenue. This youth academy project of yours, it's a lovely idea. But it's a luxury we can't afford. We need marquee signings. Galacticos. Alex doesn't even blink. He leans forward, his passion a physical force in the room. I'm not building a team for one season. I'm building an institution that will dominate for a generation. These kids, they're not just players. They're the future. And they're special. The chairman just smiles a thin, dismissive smile. The kind that says the conversation is over and you've lost. Later that night, long after everyone has gone home, Alex is still there, watching his youth team run drills, his face illuminated by the stark white floodlights. He scribbles one last note in that black book, tucks it into his tracksuit jacket, and gives a final, proud look at his boys. Then he turns and walks into the shadowy mouth of the players' tunnel. He was never seen again. 5 years later, the case is ice cold. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Reid, a woman whose office is decorated with childhood scarves from the very club she's now investigating, stares at the missing persons photo of Alex Campbell. He's been a ghost for half a decade. The new chairman, the same man from that boardroom, sits opposite her, radiating impatience. 5 years, detective. It's a tragedy, truly. But life and football must go on. We have a new stand to build. A stadium expansion. We can't have the past holding the future hostage. Sarah just nods, her eyes lingering on the case file. But as the chairman leaves, 2 junior detectives by the water cooler don't bother to lower their voices. Reid still on that? Seriously? The guy probably ran off to Spain with a club secretary. It happens. Yeah, or he cracked under the pressure. You know what these football managers are like. It's a brutal business. Sarah hears every word. Her jaw tightens. She wasn't just a detective on this case. She was a fan. And something about this, it didn't smell right. The ghost of Manchester was whispering, and DCI Sarah Reid was finally listening. The future, as the chairman called it, was a deafening, dusty affair. The historic stadium was getting its long-awaited expansion. Foundations were being dug deeper than ever before, tearing into the very earth the club was built on. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and freshly turned soil. It was a hard-hatted construction foreman, a lifelong Manchester fan named Dave, who made the discovery. His excavator bucket hit something solid, something that wasn't earth or rock. It was a metallic clang. He and his crew carefully dug around it with their hands, brushing away the dense clay. What they uncovered was a large, sealed stainless steel box, slightly corroded but remarkably intact. A time capsule, buried decades prior. The site went quiet, the machinery shutting down one by one. The box was delivered to DCI Reid's office. The contents, laid out on her desk under the harsh fluorescent light, were a strange collection. old programs, a faded scarf, a VHS tape of a famous victory. And then she saw it, tucked away in a separate, waterproof pouch. Alex Campbell's small, black leather notebook. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The thing he was always writing in. That night, the rest of the world faded away. Sarah sat alone, a single desk lamp illuminating the pages. At first, it was what you'd expect. Player assessments, training drills, tactical diagrams for the youth squad. But as she turned the pages, the nature of the notes changed. This wasn't just a diary. It was a manifesto, a blueprint. It outlined a radical financial model, a way to make the club self-sustaining through its academy, breaking the cycle of massive debt-incurring transfers. There were complex equations projecting revenue from homegrown player sales a decade into the future. It was genius, forward-thinking, and incredibly threatening to anyone making money from the old way of doing things. Then she reached the final pages. Here the writing became tighter, more frantic. It was a list of youth players' names. But next to each name, instead of a skill rating, was a strange hand-drawn symbol, a circle with a line through it, a star, a triangle. They looked almost like hieroglyphs. What were you trying to say, Alex? What do these marks mean? She didn't have the answer yet. But she now knew one thing for certain. Alex Campbell wasn't a man who would just run away. He was a visionary on the verge of revolutionizing everything. And someone, somewhere, had a very good reason to make sure his blueprint never saw the light of day. The ghost had left a map, and Sarah was now determined to follow it. The blueprint was a puzzle Sarah couldn't solve alone. The symbols haunted her. She needed context, a key, and that key, she suspected, was held by the people who were there, the players. Her search led her to a rundown pub on the outskirts of Manchester, a world away from the gleaming stadium. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and disinfectant. In a dimly lit corner she found him, Mark Rogers, once a promising midfielder in Alex Campbell's youth squad, now a man in his late 20s, his eyes dulled by drink and regret. He was nervous, his hands shaking as he lifted a pint to his lips. The professor, he was different. Cared about us, not just as players, as people. Saw things nobody else did. Sarah slid a photocopy of the notebook page across the sticky table, her finger pointing to the strange symbols next to his name. He flinched, his face paling. He knew. Bloody hell, he knew all along. He took a long, shaky breath, the weight of a 5-year silence crushing him. There were whispers. Lads being told to have an off game, to miss a pass, sky a penalty. Not the big, obvious stuff. Just enough to influence things. The chairman, he had friends, people in the betting syndicates. They were making a fortune on the youth matches. Low profile, huge odds. Sarah's blood ran cold. It wasn't about the first team. It was about the kids. The invisible, untouchable games. The professor figured it out. He was building this perfect system, and he saw the rot at the heart of it. He confronted the chairman, told him he was going to the FA, to the press, that he'd blow the whole thing wide open. He said he was going to clean the house from the foundations up. Mark looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a terrible, knowing fear. A week later, he was gone. Back at the station, armed with this new truth, Sarah's investigation exploded into life. She pulled every archived betting slip, every obscure ledger from 1998. She cross-referenced the dates in Alex's notebook with the youth team fixtures. And there it was. The key. The symbols weren't random. The circle with a line meant a player was being pressured to underperform. The star meant they were clean, unaware of the corruption. The triangle. That was a player who had reported the approach to Alex. Every single symbol in that book matched a suspicious, high-volume betting pattern on the youth matches. Alex Campbell hadn't just been building a football team. He had been conducting his own secret investigation, building a case against the most powerful man at the club. He wasn't just a missing manager. He was a whistleblower, and he'd been silenced to protect a multi-million-pound betting ring operating in the shadows of the beautiful game. The ghost hadn't just left a map, he had left the evidence. All Sarah had to do was follow it to its brutal, final conclusion. The drive to the stadium was shrouded in a heavy, grim silence. Sarah Reid sat in the passenger seat, the photocopied pages of the notebook feeling like a lead weight in her lap. The symbols, now decoded, painted a picture of such insidious corruption that it made her skin crawl. Next to her, the senior forensics officer stared ahead, his jaw set. They weren't going on a hunch anymore. They were following a direct 5-year-old accusation from a dead man. They entered the hallowed, echoing space of the players' tunnel. It was unnervingly quiet, without the roar of a crowd. The air was cool, smelling of concrete and disinfectant. The chairman, flanked by lawyers, trailed behind them, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This is an outrageous desecration, detective." Based on the ramblings of a drunk and a madman's scribbles? Sarah didn't even acknowledge him. Her eyes were fixed on the tunnel wall, exactly where Mark Rogers had described. It looked seamless, just bare concrete. But as the forensic team set up their ground-penetrating radar, the machine began to emit a soft, persistent ping. There was a hollow space behind it, a void that shouldn't have been there. The decision was made. With a screech that tore through the silence, a concrete saw bit into the wall. Dust filled the air, choking and thick. Sarah's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The officers worked carefully, prying away a large section of the false wall. The dust slowly settled. And there, in the stark, unforgiving beam of the police torches, was the truth. A skeleton, still dressed in the faded, tattered remnants of a tracksuit, slumped in a seated position. The club crest on the jacket was still faintly visible. Clutched in the bony fingers of one hand was a football whistle, its metal tarnished, almost black. He had been here the entire time. In the heart of the club he loved, sealed in the darkness, just yards away from the pitch where his boys played on, unaware. The chairman made a small, choked sound. All the color drained from his face. The confident, powerful facade crumbled into sheer, undisguised terror. Sarah just stared, her own breath caught in her throat. The ghost of Manchester was no longer a mystery. He was a body, and he had just given his final, damning testimony. The trial was the sensation of the decade. The ghost of Manchester was no longer a tabloid headline, but a corpse with a name, a story, and a killer. The evidence was irrefutable. The notebook, the betting records, Mark Rogers' testimony, and the chilling, final piece, Alex Campbell's body, hidden like a dirty secret in the cathedral of the game. The chairman, stripped of his expensive suits and power, was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed. The fall of a titan. But as the courtroom doors closed behind him, a different sound began to swell. Outside the courthouse, and back at the stadium, it wasn't anger that filled the air. It was something more powerful. Reverence. The fans, the true heart of the club, had their hero back, not as a missing person, but as a martyr for the soul of their team. Months later, on a bright, clear day, a new statue was unveiled at the stadium. Not of a player scoring a goal, but of Alex the Professor Campbell, one hand holding his famous notebook, the other resting on the shoulder of a youth player. His gaze was fixed on the training grounds, forever watching his legacy unfold. And that legacy was alive. The young men from his academy, now stars in their own right, stood in the front row. They were the living proof of his vision. Mark Rogers was among them, sober, his head held high. Alex's blueprint wasn't just a document in an evidence locker anymore. It had become the club's official doctrine, the foundation upon which everything was now built. DCI Sarah Reid watched from the crowd, a quiet smile on her face. She wasn't a detective on a case anymore. She was just a fan. They tried to bury him in the shadows, to silence his voice forever. They thought they could build their future right over him. But you can't bury the truth. In the end, his vision, his belief in something pure, became the very foundation they had tried to lay on top of his grave. The whistle he clutched in the dark hadn't been a cry for help. It had been a final act of defiance. A signal that the game wasn't over. And as the crowd's chant rose to a deafening roar, it was clear who had won. Alex Campbell was finally home. Not in the cold, dark wall, but here, in the light, in the hearts of the fans, and in the beautiful game he had given everything to protect. The fight for justice doesn't always happen on the field. Sometimes it's a single voice against an entire system. If you believe the truth deserves to be heard, do us a favor and give this video a like. It helps us bring more uncovered stories to light. Thanks for watching.